Welcome to Kepler Conversations. I'm Dr. Scott Postma. Kepler is an online marketplace for classical Christian education. We employ the historic university model and leverage the best available technology so that we can empower families by liberating teachers who make a classical liberal arts education available, accessible, and affordable. Today, I'm joined by Kepler teacher Dan Shirley. Dan is a lifelong learner and a lover of classical education. He lives in North Carolina with his lovely wife and a dog named Lou. He earned his master's degree from Southeastern University, where he's also an adjunct professor. He's also a certified Circe Master Teacher and a private tutor in Latin and the great books. Welcome, Dan. Glad to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. Excited to have this conversation.
Well, super. Well, one of the things that we love to find out is more about you. And so folks can kind of get to know you a little bit. So outside of teaching, who's Dan Shirley? What do you love to do?
Oh, man. I was having a conversation with my little brother recently. We were on our way to the rock climbing gym. So rock climbing is one of the things that I really enjoy doing, the outdoors in general. And we were talking about what is the ideal number of hobbies to have kind of outside your professional direction. And he landed on the number of no more than 5. And I think by the time we finished kind of going through and I made an argument for each one of the things that I enjoy doing, I think we were at something like 13. So we could just kind of run through, right? Love being alive. Definitely a dog is a full-time hobby, so we spend a lot of time taking care of the dog. My wife does a lot with the dog. We love camping, outdoor stuff. You could see my little backpacking gear kit over here on the wall with all the hammocks and water filtration and camp stoves. My friend and I are just starting to figure out what it looks like to get our A license in skydiving.
Okay.
So we've been trying to tackle that for the next little bit. I don't know how far that's going to go, but we're through the written part and we've done a couple of low-key jumps. I enjoy Brazilian jiu-jitsu, running, ultra marathoning, all sorts of things. So yeah, I've tried a lot of things and I do most of them semi-frequently. So yeah.
Well, nothing like variety, to make life fun, huh? Having all kinds of opportunities.
It's quite enjoyable.
Every one of those sounds extremely fun, except for the running part. I have, no matter, even in the best shape of my life, I have never enjoyed running for whatever reason.
I don't know. Yeah, what it is right now, ultra running and like trail running and that kind of stuff is like the 3rd fastest growing sport in the world, like globally right now. It's like number 1, I think, is pickleball, which makes sense. I don't really play pickleball, but I know that people are tuning into that. Number 3 is ultra running, which is just wild because it's so painful, but it is like it's euphoric in some sense as well. Like the challenge is just, if you like that kind of thing.
It sounds incredible. It sounds like a lot of energy or a lot of effort, that goes into something like that. That somebody dedicated. I can see how that could be very euphoric.
Indeed.
Well, as we kind of think about the courses you're teaching, as we talk about that here in just a moment, tell us a little bit about your own background. We in your bio got something of your formal education, but tell us how you came to classical education, or what your growing up education was like.
Yeah, so I was raised in the classical education renewal. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but I was enrolled in a classical conversations program back when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. So coming up on 23, 24 years ago, and was raised inside that, very much a guinea pig orientation. A lot of the programs were in formation and developing as we were moving through. But that really kind of introduced me to these, the idea of the great books. And I think one of the turning points in my journey was actually when I went out to, I think it was for a senior trip. My mom, Heather Shirley, and I went out to Idaho to go to this thing called Hill Abbey. And I don't think West does it anymore. But are you familiar with West Callahan's Hill Abbey? Yeah. So we did 1 year when I was 17, and I think it was 2 weeks on the City of God. And so we sat around for 2 weeks, kind of pseudo monastic lifestyle, and and read through the City of God. And I just remember the people that were there, the conversations that were being had. It was like, oh, like this used to be a thing. Like people would engage over these texts in ways like this. And so that really kind of began my trajectory into that space. I went to a liberal arts college for 2 years. It was called Rivendell Sanctuary. Now it's called the Created Institute, a fun little spot. It's a little different now, but did that and then taught there for a little while. Met my wife at Belmont Abbey College, and then was doing the Circe apprenticeship, and then got my master's degree through Southeastern. So it's just been since about 6 or 7, pretty steeped in it, which is, it's got its perks, pros and cons, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I definitely, I think it's a pro. We were just having a conversation, a couple different conversations actually, and it's kind of interesting how these all kind of fit together. But in C.S. Lewis's essay, De Descriptione Temporum, on the description of times, when he talks about being a dinosaur or a native of old Western culture and who aren't, it sort of reminded me also of a conversation where we were looking at some young people who had come up in the classical renewal movement, who are much different in the way they think than some of us who were not raised in classical education, just public school educated. And then you come into it because you see the value and you're trying to clean it off like a treasure.
Right.
For them, they're natives, right? Like what C.S. Lewis talks about. To them, this is the way of life, and it sounds like you would be a native in the classical renewal.
Indeed, yeah, it's been fascinating to just kind of watch, especially like as far as like the CC flavor of the classical renewal, the classical conversations flavor. Very, very familiar with, and I work with them as well on like their contributions, their piece to largely I see them as a kind of a gateway for a lot of people into this space of classical education.
That's amazing. So, well, we know that coming teaching previously at the Circe Online Academy and Kepler and Circe had a jointure earlier this year, and so we're really privileged to get to work with a lot of really great teachers who've come on the platform. So let's talk a little bit about the course you're teaching, because this is one of my favorite subjects.
All right.
Not again that I'm a native in it, but it's one of those that just always is fascinating to me, and that's Norse mythology. So can you tell us a little bit about the course? What are students going to be studying? Who is this for? And why should anybody care about a bunch of dead old Vikings?
Yeah, these are great questions. Yeah, so what was it? The original course that I wanted to teach whenever I was starting to sign up for it when the Circe Online Academy was doing its thing was actually Native American mythology. So I wanted to kind of get in tune with some element of the heritage of national folklore and myth and legend that I wasn't already familiar with. And so when that course didn't really garner that many registrations, because I guess it wasn't a topic of interest for that many people, I switched and pivoted to Norse mythology. So it really wasn't out of comfortability of and being an expert or anything like that in the topic. It was, I haven't really read many of these stories before. I've seen the Marvel movies like everybody has. I know that there's all these conversations going on about the reenchantment of the world and kind of the breakdown of modern materialism, this kind of revelation of narrative onto the scene of the classical renewal. And so this seemed like a good one because it's confusing as well. Like most people are at least somewhat familiar with the Greek myths and they kind of know what to expect. I find that the Norse mythology is kind of a breath of fresh air. It probably does. It's kind of like a Scandinavian winter breeze, like hitting you. Like it's visceral. The imagery is quite dense. It can be confusing, difficult to parse through, and is just wild to read out loud. Like that's my favorite thing to read the Genesis narrative or the Genesis equivalent inside the Prose Edda. Because that's the text we use is the Prose Edda translated by Snorri Sturluson, which is just another great name. Students always love that. And the first myth, the creation myth, it has like 3 separate iterations of the creation of mankind. and they're all crazy, like from the armpit of a giant or getting licked out of a giant block of ice by a giant cosmic cow. And so like just kind of as a tool for reenchantment, I feel like the Norse myths are just really, really quite lovely. And so that's kind of the reason that I chose it, the reason that I have stuck with the text.
It's fascinating. Well, as many people who have read Tolkien know, that that was sort of an area of focus for him, which is in many ways kind of the myth behind the myth, if you will. What inspired in many ways, his picture of Middle Earth and that approach to reenchantment. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps the heroic aspect? When we think of Homeric Greek, heroes, we have a particular image, right? Hector or Achilles. So who are the heroes in the Norse myths, and are they different? Are they the same? What do we gain from them in these stories?
Yeah, I think there is a fair amount of moral ambiguity inside the Greek myths. And I feel like inside the Norse mythology as well, there is this maybe more, I don't know how to describe the difference in flavor of the moral ambiguity, but there's almost like, what's the best way to say it? You don't always get the sense that the Greek heroes are functioning inside the space of total and absolute doom. Like this idea that there is no way to achieve success ultimately. It's like every success achieved is just for a time. And so as you move through the stories, I think that this is something that becomes ultimately revealed in the final tale of Ragnarok. And there is this kind of this hope for a new world and rebirth inside the story of Ragnarok. But you think about the different heroes inside Norse mythology. Obviously, you have Odin, who again is heroic, but kind of just above everything else as he's functioning. He'll do things that are self-serving sometimes, but then in other stories, he's literally almost depicted as a Christ-like figure as he's kind of hanging on the world tree, right? Sacrificing himself for the good of the world, for wisdom. And then Thor is just kind of the, blunt instrument, the Achilles, right, of the Norse cosmos. And Loki is somewhat of a kind of Odyssean figure, although he's more crude and kind of mischievous with his tactics. And so I think the thing that stands out the most is you're not really ever sure who the good guy is and who the bad guy is inside the stories. I mean, am I doing it justice? What do you think?
I do. I think that's wonderful. And it leads me to ask this question that we get all the time, and it's probably not a question you have ever entertained before. And I say that tongue in cheek. And that is, why should Christians read these myths then? Every year, as more and more people discover classical education, Christian families are homeschooling, and so they'll come to Kepler and shocked by the fact that these kids are reading pagan authors, and so how is this classical education? Why should Christians do that? And then when we talk through it, oftentimes these families are like, oh, I never considered it that way. So I'd love to hear your answer. And I know I'm setting you up, putting you on the spot a little bit, but I'd love to hear why we should read these as Christians.
Why should we read these as Christians? Okay, so I'll couch this in a little bit of personal context. So I'm Eastern Orthodox. That's my kind of Christian affiliation. And one of the things that I found really fascinating when I converted about 8 or 9 years ago was the mythic contents of the Christian corpus, right? So like we have, obviously, we're all very familiar with the canon of Scripture. But there are all sorts of hymns and adjacent tales and myths and stories, whether they be saints' lives or, that all kind of exist. They're not like Christian fan fiction, but they're like, around the central canon of the story. And I didn't know that Christian mythology even really existed when I was growing up in my variety of Protestant kind of experiences. And what was, but I knew the pagan myths existed. And there was always something interesting about like a mythic universe. So like, and are we inhabiting a mythic universe? It seems so. And there are ancient Christian practices that really kind of emphasize this this kind of mythic world. But I think, you know, to answer the question from my own experience, I would say I've encountered some of these ancient stories and the contents in them to sometimes be, and maybe the authors themselves, to be more Christian than maybe modern Christians are Christian.
Yeah.
It just because it's a difference in frame. It's a difference in posture toward being. You could say it's a difference in worldview, although that term is a little bit meaningless or captured, you know. So I think that's what I would say the value is that you can see a world in which Christianity sprung up and, you know, became prominent. And that's not the world we inhabit anymore. Like the myths of the modern world are much more, I don't know, temporal, secular, in the literal sense of the word. I don't know. There's been some commentary on a breakdown of the consensus on something like the mythology of World War II recently, kind of in some of the conversation circles that I'm seeing. And that myth is just weaker. It's weaker than these myths, right? And if we don't have a point of comparison, then maybe we make the same mistake and we treat our own Christian myths as a myth like World War II consensus rather than, you know, something more permanent, something more culturally anchored. Yeah.
It's a great answer. It really brings us full circle to what you were talking about earlier about reenchantment, right? This idea of seeing the world, especially those of us in the modern or post-Christian era, where
Mhm.
it's difficult for us to look at the world as being enchanted as it really is. And I heard somebody recently say, in some sense, we need to be unenchanted, and what they meant by that was is, you know, we need to have those scales removed, or this enchantment that we have been enchanted by
Right.
the
Yeah.
modern so that we can recover the truth. And that's exactly
Mm.
what Tolkien, you know, was doing with the Lord of the Rings,
Indeed.
and brought Lewis even to Christ through the idea that when we talk about myth, we're not, you know, not all the stories are true, but not all myths are lies. So there's the true
Yep.
myth, and they're all echoes of this story. You know, I further find that when you study these stories, whether they be Norse or the Greek myths,
Mhm.
you're looking at a world in which the New Testament, particular, came to us, or even the Old Testament. And so a lot of the stories you read in the scriptures they don't make sense to our modern mind, or when we do read them, we read
Right.
them eisegetically, unless you understand the myths, right? Unless
Mhm.
you understand these stories. So, yeah, I love that. So, just maybe briefly, in the courses, so you're reading Snorlson's, are you reading Beowulf, or are you?
Nope. No
No.
Beowulf. Yeah, we're just reading from beginning to end through this text, about two
Okay.
myths a week. So the reading is fairly light, but again, imaginally dense.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
And then who is the course for? So, like, what age groups should take a look at this course?
Yeah, I think somewhere in between the age ranges of 12 and 17. And I can talk a little bit more about the assignment structure of
Yeah.
the course. But yeah, that would be the preferred age range. Something a little bit, you know, kind of teenage years is probably okay. There's a couple of stories in it that, you know, they might go over younger kids' heads, but you know, you wouldn't want to have them trying to reenact some of Loki's shenanigans, that kind of stuff.
Thematic elements, as they would often be called. So yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. So maybe as we, kind of wind down our conversation, can you give us maybe a picture of, I don't know, maybe there's an interesting spin or a corrective about a popular but wrong idea. Maybe it's just a nugget or intriguing story that would whet the appetite of somebody who's watching this video.
Yeah. So, like I've mentioned and said, yeah, at least 3 or 4 times at this point, the images are quite fascinating to try to attend to and figure out what's really kind of going on. And so, I often will pose riddles to my students. Like, I'll present them the image, and then I'll say, what do you think this means? Like, how do we understand this? What's going on inside the narrative at this point? Again, working on trying to get rid of the enchantment that we've been enchanted with.
Yeah.
To be able to see these kind of pictures the way that an ancient person would have seen them as much as we can. And so one of my favorite riddles is in the story of the binding of Fenrir.
Mm.
Are you familiar with the kind of
No, I'm more familiar with like Siegfried and some of those stories.
Okay. Yeah. So in the binding of Fenrir, Loki has these three monstrous children. One of them is named Hel, the other one is Jormungand, and then Fenrir. Jormungand is the world serpent, right? Think like Ouroboros. He's totally surrounding the land of Midgard, kind of consuming his own tail in this kind of iconic ancient picture. Fenrir is this giant wolf who never stops growing. And he's a problem. He's prophesied to eat Odin, the father of all gods and men, at the end of the days. And so they need to figure out a way to bind him. And so they recruit the dwarves to make chains to bind him. And they make this giant chain, and then they call it a name that I can't remember what it's called, some Norse word. And they try to bind Fenrir, and he just snaps out of it by flexing his shoulders. So they go back. They're like, we need another chain. And so they make an even bigger and more brazen chain. And then they go to bind him again. And this one seems even weaker than the other one. Breaks that off. So they say, we've got to try a different strategy. So the dwarves construct a chain out of all of these really strange and random elements. So one of it's made out of the sound that a cat makes. It's made out of the hair of a woman's beard, the spittle of a bird, and several other things. And so I'm like, and it's thin as like a ribbon is how it's described in the story. And they take it and they bind Fenrir, and he can't escape the chain. And so that's a riddle that I leave my students with. And so, what's going on in that image? How does that make sense? What's the same? What's different between all these components that are being used to make the chain? So, yeah.
Fascinating elements.
Yes.
Spittle from a bird. So students, you're going to have to jump into this course if you want to learn this riddle and find out what it means. But Dan, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation and getting to know a little bit more about your course. And all of the links to get to know more about Dan, to his course, are in the show notes here. I hope you come by, check it out. Dan, thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
All right.
Appreciate it.
God bless everybody. Bye-bye.